Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar hosted by Jscrambler, where we will explore the state of application security in UK banking. So today we will start by getting a better understanding of the main cybersecurity challenges faced by players of this industry, and then we will share some first-hand data points that really illustrate how banks are actually addressing these challenges. I want to start by letting you know that this webinar has been pre-recorded. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us by email and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So to introduce the team for the day, my name is Philip Lima. I am the marketing team lead at Jscrambler. And for these almost 4 years I've been working at Jscrambler, I have directly explored some of the main application security challenges faced by companies in banking. And I've been fortunate enough to work closely with our research team that has uncovered some very interesting insights I will be sharing today. So be sure to stick around with us today because this is actually the first time we will be unveiling some key statistics about the current state of application security in this UK banking ecosystem. As you can see today, I'm in very good company because I'm joined by two very experienced professionals who have an extensive track record in banking in the UK. First off, we will be joined by Richard Smith, an independent architect and consultant who is extremely well versed in the digital transformation strategy in banking and the main hurdles that companies must face in the way to get there in the UK specifically. Then we will also welcome Mohammed Kamil, who is the CEO and founder of dotConnect, a SaaS digital company that works closely with UK financial institutions and helps them navigate this shift to digital. I'm sure we have, of course, a very good session ahead of us. So I will just get the ball rolling by moving things over to Richard. Welcome, Richard. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippe, and hello, everyone. I won't go into too much detail about myself and my credentials. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, feel free. We'll move swiftly on because I only have 10 minutes today. I will be covering the digital transformation landscape in UK banking and regulations for general data protection and open banking in this space. So, what's been happening in the digital transformation space? Even as late as 4 years ago, some very senior people in the UK financial institutions were still of the belief that digital transformation was just a website and a mobile app. Luckily, perceptions have moved on, but massive strides haven't necessarily been made either. There are banks which have gone down the large waterfall program route and are yet to have produced anything of direct value, or in reality are engaged in digital evolution over transformation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing depending on the situation the bank is in and their strategy and what they're actually trying to target. Um, Many UK banks have digital customer channels. Cybersecurity is actually something many UK banks take very seriously and place high priority on that. So, effective digital transformation. Well, I could say digital transformation is a journey, but unless you've already convinced your C level and board to adopt that journey, that line won't help you sell it. So, instead, digital transformation is a portfolio of individual initiatives which individually deliver value, but deliver even greater value as a whole. In turn, this creates an organisation which is elastic to change and resilient to disruption, able to continually adapt to the needs of customers and the market. Much easier to sell and actually define some end goals. What do I mean by greater value? Well, that, as I've said, is it's an outcome which is greater than its parts. For example, a mobile app is great. It reduces costs of customer channels versus those that are staffed. Um, an automated loan acceptance process is great. It reduces the costs that are associated with the more manual processes, and process times are quicker and it scales more easily. But if you combine those, if you bring a great real-time customer experience that delivers to customers what they need when they need it, it means they don't go somewhere else and that customer isn't lost. So a greater sum of its parts. Look, digital in use. COVID has been seen as a catalyst in digital channel adoption and evolving our ways of working. A week after the European lockdowns, finance app usage grew 72% across Europe. Switching to working from home practices allowed for customers to continue to be served, operations to continue to operate, whilst protecting staff and the greater community from COVID transmission. Um, COVID disruption saw many customers receiving awful levels of service as just merely because organisations failed to adapt their service models. They just weren't agile enough. Cyber attack instances actually grew as more people started using digital channels to go about their normal day. And look, we won't see a complete reversal of this across the UK banking industry, either in the way customers consume now using digital channels or through working models expecting everybody to come back to the office. But this has also changed the nature of our threat landscape. Opening up services to digital channels has provided banks far more front doors and some back doors. And these types of threats, we've generally got those that look to disrupt service because, let's face it, finance is a key service in the UK. Those that look to steal because why not make some money? And sometimes it's both disruption and trying to make financial profit through stealing effectively. So these threats, I'll go through the headings. I'll go into detail on some of these. So ransomware, denial of service, credential stuffing. Now, credential stuffing is where details and credentials have been obtained through another external leak from another company, and like using that customer's email address or passwords, memorable information, or whatever else, go on to try and access other digital channels. Sorry, bear with me. Insider threats, new ways of working, as I've just covered. People now working more at home. Zero trust security, probably an odd one to have here. Zero trust does fix a lot of the cybersecurity challenges that are present in trusted security models, but we're still very much dependent on edge device security. Supply chains, cloud security, fourth parties, and cloud service providers. You may take every precaution to mitigate max against every potential threat, but what about those in your supply chain and the weaknesses of other parties? What about the parties your third parties are dependent on, so your fourth and your fifth parties? And cloud security is generally robust, providing you adhere to best practice. But as more services rely on CSPs, so does the potential prize for an attacker, and it presents a concentration risk. And look, we could see this through government-sponsored actors might go and target a cloud provider with the hope of really causing disruption rather than individual entities. And cyber fraud. So, if it's not, trying to disrupt, it's just clear theft. Although customers are gaining greater security through security models that mobile phones provide now, with a whole segregation of applications and strong controls such as strong customer authentication, confirmation of payee. The attacker vector still remains either through compromising the edge device, reverse engineering, and or customer manipulation. Ultimately, there's no magic bullet to cybersecurity, and a defense in depth strategy with monitoring will yield greater levels of protection, and that's a defense in depth strategy across the entire communication chains between customers and backend. So regulations. The FCA links cybersecurity and resilience to operational security and resilience, and therefore many of the principles underpinning existing regulation apply to the ever-changing nature of cyber threat landscape. I don't have enough time to go through all of these, unfortunately, but uh, we've obviously got the FCA handbook and its various principles, the senior management arrangement systems and controls with their different numbers, which we've got there, strong customer authentication, operational resiliency, which is something that many banks are very focused on at the moment. Um, these regulations currently on the screen are largely around management of third parties and actually the rigor you should put around those relationships, and you can't discharge your obligations. So, the FCA continues to evaluate the impacts of cyber threats to the stability of market integrity and impacts to consumer protections. These current evaluations include supply chain security, concentration risk around cloud service providers, and discovery through forums such as the Cyber Coordination Group. Cyber threat, cyber security, and cyber integrity is a big part of the FCA's current business plan that they're running through, and very much at the front of their initiatives for this year, as well as for the next 5 years. Open banking, that's going to continue to evolve as the FCA have an appetite through open finance. That open banking is very much concentrated on payment institutions and payment account information, and obviously the facilities around payment accounts. That's going to expand across different types of financial organisations, insurance, pensions, that sort of thing, and also the variety of products and the data behind them will become more exposed to third parties, obviously on the back of customer authorization. So I think that actually brings me right up to 10 minutes. So thank you very much. And Philippe, back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. This was a truly impressive overview of all these concepts done in record time, no less. And it segues really nicely into the next part of our presentation today. So now it's my great pleasure to welcome Mohammed Gamil. Thank you for joining us, Mohammed. And I guess we're all excited to learn what you have to share with us today.
Good morning. My name is Mohammed Gamil. I am the CEO and co-founder of dotConnect Solutions, which we provide digital customer engagement as a service for financial institutions, banks, credit unions, building societies in the UK. Before that, I was the Chief Operating Officer of a Ryan Bank for almost 10 years here in the UK. And before that, I was in Finestra for 7 years in the Middle East, managing their customer services and professional services. I wouldn't go even before that, but I just spent my entire career in between fintechs and banks. The topic that we're going to talk about today is online banking and mobile banking apps in the UK and the landscape and how much JavaScript is playing an element on that one. To start with, JavaScript is the official language for the browsers. So there's no online banking will not be have a JavaScript element for the browsers to read. And I think there's an old saying that JavaScript is the king of the web and the queen of the mobile apps. So there is an element in JavaScript in mobile apps and web. Different frameworks are there, React and Angular and a number of other frameworks. But at the end of the day, they generate the JavaScript to be able to read from the browsers. We've seen in the last few years an increased demand. It started with open banking, and that will open the door for third party to have some sort of redirection between the mobile app or the browser and the third party websites to for the customer to provide the consent for sharing the data or initiating a payment through the third party. And we've seen a demand after the pandemic quite significantly of the use of online banking and mobile apps. So even those they were used to classify them as less technologically savvy, they kind of had to use this technology because they cannot go to the branches anymore and they have to do their normal businesses, their normal payments or checking the accounts or whatever. So that's why the increase came, and that's why uh, um, 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 the use of the digital channels became quite important. And I think it's very common now you hear in the market about digital transformation. It's became like the buzzword. Everyone is doing digital transformation. And despite my different view on for how long you transform once and you keep maintaining the change, but that's a by the by. Uh, and in the heart of all of that, it will come to the security. As you are now exposing your code to the public domain, people can just inspect the source of your browser and can see what your logic in JavaScript. It has to be readable because the browser has to have to read it. So exposing the code, that's straight away a security concern because people can know what you are doing in your code. And of course, there are a number of techniques that you try to maintain the logic server side, not the endpoint side. But no matter what you do, you are exposing your code to the public domain. People can see it, can read it, and can figure out and can reverse engineer it. And this is where it comes the tricky point. How can you secure your code that you have to expose because this is JavaScript? The browser has to read it. You have to expose. How can you secure your code from reverse engineered, from getting into the wrong hands that they will try to track down what exactly you're doing in your logic and try to use that against your clients? And I think this is where will come to the obfuscation or will come to the scrambling your code. And I wonder why obfuscation to date is not a mandated from the regulator that this technology has to be in place or not mandated from the security consultants. I think it's more of a recommended. They don't mandate that this is ticking the box. You have to have your code obfuscated before you progress any further. But I think we'll come to that into the second session. I will hand over now to Philip.
Thank you again, Mohammed. Yes, today I have some fresh data and insights that I will be sharing for the first time. But before we get there, I just want to preface that by quickly explaining exploring these new web and mobile apps that have played such a crucial role in this path to digital banking, but that also come with their own fair share of security um, challenges and quirks that must be addressed. Um, and I think it's fair to say that it all stems from the JavaScript development language as a whole, and this language has grown into a very thriving ecosystem with the open source communities that pretty much power everything we see today on the web. It allows teams to build native-like apps, for instance, using JavaScript frameworks like React Native, Ionic, and so forth with a lower investment and shorter time to market. So it kind of brought disruption into how not just web but also mobile banking apps are being developed today. Um, but of course, companies that are using JavaScript now and banks specifically must understand the changes to their threat models that come from using this type of programming language. And a particularity with JavaScript is that client side JavaScript, so by client side, I mean code that is being executed on a browser or that is stored on a user's device. So this code can be targeted and accessed pretty much by anyone. Um, Anyone can read it, modify it at will. Um, and this is true in hybrid mobile applications. The, the packages of these apps, so IPA, APK packages, they contain the whole logic of the JavaScript code that is bundled there. Um, and so then this prompts and allows attackers to target this unprotected source code and get their way into attacks such as automated abuse, code theft, data leakage, actually, and things like scraping and so on. Um, which is actually no surprise that this is a topic that is being addressed actively by OWASP, so the Open Web Application Security Project, a community that has been actively engaging and discussing these threats. So, in their mobile top 10 guide, which is one of the most famously used ones by engineering and security teams, they mentioned that the mobile apps must be able to detect at runtime if their code has been tampered with in any way. And so they require that the code has some integrity checks to it. And also, another key topic is reverse engineering. So the application itself is susceptible to reverse engineering, and so this must be prevented somehow by transforming the code and preventing these reverse engineering attempts. And the question now is how. And one thing that is a common misconception is that technologies such as SAST and DAST um, are able to fix this. But SAST and DAST, they are used basically to find and fix vulnerabilities in the source code. But even if teams are using, which they should use, these tools to find and fix these vulnerabilities, at the end the code is still the JavaScript code will still be plain text, easy to read, easy to interpret by anyone and tampered with. So the options here, much like OWASP advises, are to protect the source code and making it really hard to reverse engineer and to tamper with. And this can basically be done by using obfuscation, environmental checks, and runtime defenses such as anti-tampering and anti-debugging capabilities. Um, so this kind of leads us into the question. So how are banking institutions in the UK addressing these threats? And this is where, of course, our data comes in. And our research team has been analyzing a sample of UK banks, and we basically first discovered that, as expected, the vast majority of them are using JavaScript code, not only on their web banking apps, but also on their mobile banking apps, so 63%. And now then they understood, they tried to understand if they are protecting the code or not, and basically what we found was that over half of them are not obfuscating at all their JavaScript source code, leaving it again exposed to these threats that can happen at the client side. And finally, just a very small number of banks were actually using runtime protection capabilities as advised again by OWASP to prevent attacks happening at runtime. But this is just the first chapter of this story because I also want to address something that Richard mentioned earlier. So, supply chain attacks, which have been, of course, one of the main, fastest growing threats to institutions worldwide. Um, and there's a major blind spot opening up banking websites to these sort of attacks. And here on the right, you can see the anatomy of a modern website, and you can just see how many different pieces, components that come from third-party vendors make up these platforms. 70% of the whole code typically comes from third-party providers. Typically around 35, maybe some additional ones, as we'll see further on, come from third parties. Um, and so this makes it pretty much impossible for companies to have visibility into how these different complex dynamic scripts and components of their websites are behaving at runtime. But then again, banking websites, of course, they process very sensitive information, very sensitive data that is being inputted by their users on the website. So it puts this information at risk of theft, essentially, and hence the emergence of a new class of uh, supply chain attacks, web supply chain attacks that we can see portrayed here on the right, where an attacker, a group of attackers just need to infiltrate one of these third-party components, inject their malicious code into that component, which then silently makes its way down the supply chain and runs. So the infected component ends up running on the bank's website, affecting its end users. Um, and this code has the same privileges as any of the code developed internally. And these third-party components can then just start interfering with forms and leaking user data, mostly and most often without any visibility from the affected company. And we've seen attacks like British Airways in 2018 that remained oblivious to the attack for some weeks, and in cases, some months go by before the attack being detected. Um, and so, again, what have we found when we looked at UK banks? Um, Essentially, we saw how exposed these UK banking websites are to third-party risks. So 23 was the average number of external domains that were being contacted by a each banking website and receiving data from these banking websites. Um, and actually, we found over 100 different assets, external third-party assets being loaded in each individual banking website, um, which boiled down into just the team tried to understand how many critical security uh, risks and alerts we were seeing happening on each of these websites, and the team found around seven. That was the average number of critical security incidents and detections that were being found, where, for instance, a website script, the third-party script, was actually interfering in a way with a form where users input their data on the banking website. Um, so in short, financial institutions must, of course, address this blind spot they have, not just on the client side, like we just saw, and their exposure to third-party risk, but also from their actual source code of their web apps and mobile apps that can be targeted by attackers. Um, in short, this is what institutions should be addressing. And now I know that Mohammed has some additional thoughts on his own experience implementing security layers, application security layers to mitigate these type of threats. So over to you again, Mohammed.
Thanks, Philip. When we started dotConnect at the end of 2018, it was at the heart of PSD2 implementation, open banking implementation. We were a startup trying to do something different in the market. And before even we put our code into the test environment, Jscrambler or was in the heart of the overall solution. It was very clearly when we started the architecture is no way we can publish our code into the public without obfuscating our JavaScripts. So we engaged directly. On that time, we did some analysis of which supplier we should use. Again, it was very obvious which supplier, which vendor we'll use and we'll partner with. So we started our journey together. We published the first set of code, all obfuscated, and since 2018, we have number of our clients using our software now. So we have two main stream banks in the UK. Underneath those two banks, they have between both of them 50,000 clients roughly using the applications in their normal banking transaction business. And touch wood, everything is looking perfect, everything is doing fine. And as you may expect, because we are in the financial sector, we have to hire professional penetration testers to examine our solution once or twice a year. In addition to that, our clients themselves, part of their security framework, they have to hire penetration testing to try to hack the solution and see, and these are ethical hacking, by the way, and see how vulnerable the solution and what do we need to do. And what, since 2018 to date, we had more than 8, 9, maybe 10 penetration testings from 4 different companies across the solution, the mobile app and desktop portal. And we passed all of that without a single comment on their ability to find out how we are doing things, how the code is doing things. So they try to hack the solution from different ways, from a black box point of view, acting as they just external people, or from what they call a gray box point of view. So we give them user IDs and passwords for potential clients and test customers, of course. And they try to access the solution to try to see what they can do with it, or how they can hack it, how they can manipulate a payment or change the payload here or there, and so forth. And it was all protected. And um, whilst the whole solution end to end has number of gateways, a number of challenges for anyone to try to hack it, but in the heart of all of that was the obfuscation of the JavaScript, which is we using Cordova and Ionic for the mobile app, and we're using and the underlying framework is Angular. It's single code base between the browser and the app. So that's very important from a development point of view, from the cost point of view. But Jscrambler is on both of them, in the mobile app and in the browser, and they haven't been able to hack any of them or find out any of them. So that give us that assurance, and which we in turn deliver to our clients, and in turn they deliver to their ultimate clients, their customers, that you are secure to the best of our ability, and we'll continue reviewing, we'll continue doing this every 6 months, doing penetration testing, doing different testers from different companies, by the way. So we don't rely on one supplier to provide the test. So you get different views and different challenges and different mindsets. And so far, that's all going fine. I think that proves the point of we have chosen the right partner, which we will continue working together on more things. Back to Philip.
Thank you again, Mohammed. Well, we are wrapping things up. But before we finish, I want to remind everyone that you'll receive an email with one of our most recent content pieces, which provides an overview of the topic that we have discussed today. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to us using the email you see here. We will also include the details on how you can get started with your own free web application inventory, so keep an eye out for your inbox. And that's all from me. Thank you, everyone out there, for joining us today, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye bye.